Jack Romano's 18-wheeler lurched to a sudden stop on Highway 200, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips as an otherworldly cry pierced the Montana darkness. The sound wasn't wolf, wasn't dog. It was something that reached straight into his combat-trained soul and twisted. It wasn't just any wild animal calling out in the night. It was a battle cry, desperate and purposeful. His CB radio crackled to life with panicked trucker chatter. "Ghost Rider, you copy? Something's got every dog from here to Kalispell howling." The diesel engine's rumble couldn't mask the haunting wail that seemed to follow his rig for the past 5 miles. Jack's Purple Heart medal swayed from his rear-view mirror as memories of Kandahar flooded back. The last time he'd heard crying like this was when his battle buddy Danny Hutchinson's K9 partner went missing after the explosion. His hands trembled against the steering wheel, wedding ring catching the dashboard light. Unit down, his radio crackled again, but Jack was already grabbing his flashlight. What was crying out there in the darkness, and why did it sound like it knew his name? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Jack Romano had been driving these lonely mountain highways for 32 years, ever since he came back from Iraq with shrapnel in his left leg and ghosts in his head. At 48, his weathered hands gripped the wheel with the same steady precision that once held an M16. But tonight, something felt different. The Purple Heart dangling from his rearview mirror caught the dashboard light as he squinted through the windshield, trying to locate the source of that haunting cry. His CB handle, Ghost Rider, wasn't just trucker poetry. Jack Romano was a man who drove the graveyard shifts on the loneliest stretches of Montana highway, hauling freight between cities most folks had never heard of. His studio apartment in Billings sat empty most nights, just like his bank account after sending half his paycheck to his ex-wife Sarah and their daughter Emma in Colorado. The divorce papers cited inability to reconnect after deployment, but Jack knew the truth was simpler. Some men come home from war and some men just come back. The crying intensified as he rolled down his window, and Jack felt his chest tighten with recognition he couldn't quite place. It wasn't the first time his PTSD had played tricks on his mind. Phantom helicopter rotors still woke him most nights, and crowded truck stops made his palms sweat. But this sound was real, echoing off the pine-covered slopes that flanked Highway 200 like dark sentries. His radio crackled again. "Any driver past mile marker 127, you hearing this? Sounds like the devil himself is crying." Jack reached for the mic, then hesitated. Mountain West Transport had strict policies about unauthorized stops, and his supervisor had already written him up twice for tardiness. One more infraction meant termination, and at his age, with his record, finding another driving job wouldn't be easy. But as the cry rose again, desperate, purposeful, almost human, Jack found himself pulling onto the narrow shoulder. The air brakes hissed like a dying breath as his rig shuddered to a stop. Through his windshield, the headlights carved a pale tunnel through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty asphalt and the ghostly outline of an abandoned barn in the distance. Jack grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and stepped down from the cab, his boots crunching on gravel still warm from the day's sun. The Montana night wrapped around him like a cold blanket, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something wild and wounded and utterly alone. The beam of Jack's flashlight swept across the roadside, catching the reflection of 2 amber eyes that didn't flinch or flee. Instead, they held his gaze with an intelligence that made his breath catch. The she-wolf sat perfectly still beside the guardrail, her dark coat matted with what looked like blood along her left shoulder. But it was her posture that struck him, not the cowering crouch of a wounded wild animal, but the disciplined set of something trained, something waiting. Jack approached slowly, his military training kicking in despite the years. "Easy, girl," he murmured, though he wasn't sure why he assumed it was female. The wolf's ears pricked forward at his voice, and she whined, not in fear, but in what sounded almost like recognition. As he drew closer, Jack could see the extent of her injuries: deep gashes along her shoulder, dried blood caked in her fur, and something else that made him stop cold. Around her neck, barely visible beneath the matted coat, was the remnant of what looked like a collar. The wolf stood then, favoring her injured leg, and began walking toward the tree line. She took a few steps, then stopped and looked back at Jack, her meaning unmistakable. "Follow me." Every rational part of Jack's mind screamed against it. He had a delivery to make in Great Falls by morning, a GPS tracker monitoring his every move, and a supervisor who'd already threatened his job. But as the wolf limped another few steps toward the darkness and looked back again, Jack found himself following. The path through the tall grass was barely visible, marked only by the wolf's determined pace and the occasional drop of blood that caught his flashlight beam. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, until the abandoned Mackenzie barn loomed out of the darkness like a ship run aground on the Montana prairie. Jack had driven past this place hundreds of times over the years, never giving it more than a glance. The old homestead had failed back in the '80s, leaving behind only this weathered barn and the ghosts of someone else's dreams. But now, as his flashlight played across the sagging doors, he could hear something that made his chest tighten. Voices, small voices, whispering in the darkness. The wolf. Luna, though he didn't know her name yet, pushed through a gap in the barn doors with the practiced ease of familiarity. Jack hesitated at the threshold, every instinct warning him that he was about to step into something that would change everything. His radio crackled from the distant truck. "Ghost Rider, your GPS shows you've stopped. What's your 20? Jack ignored the radio and followed Luna inside. His flashlight beam revealed a scene that knocked the breath from his lungs. 3 children huddled together in a nest of old hay and salvaged blankets in the far corner of the barn. The oldest, a girl maybe 8 years old, had her arms wrapped protectively around a boy who couldn't be more than 10. Between them, so small Jack almost missed her in the shadows, was a toddler who couldn't have been more than 18 months old. All 3 children looked up at Jack's light with the wide, startled eyes of deer caught in headlights. The girl, Maria, though he wouldn't learn her name until later, pulled the baby closer and whispered something in Spanish. The boy, Tommy, had the sharp cheekbones and straight black hair that spoke of native heritage, and his dark eyes held the kind of wariness that comes from too much experience with disappointment. Luna limped directly to the children, positioning herself between them and Jack with the unmistakable body language of a protector. She was hurt, probably badly, but her first concern was for these 3 small souls who had somehow found shelter in this forgotten place. Jack lowered his flashlight, trying not to startle them further. "Hey there," he said softly, the same voice he'd used with his own daughter Emma when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "Nobody's going to hurt you. I'm Jack." The girl, Maria, whispered something to the boy in a mixture of English and Spanish. Jack caught enough to understand she was asking if he was police, if he was going to take them away. The baby, Sarah, though that name wouldn't come until much later, simply stared at him with enormous blue eyes that seemed far too solemn for someone so small. It was then that Jack noticed the small piles of food scattered around the children's makeshift nest. Half a gas station sandwich still in its wrapper, a bag of chips carefully opened and portioned, a bottle of water nearly empty. And scattered around the barn floor, the unmistakable remains of small animals, rabbits, squirrels, that had been caught and partially eaten. Luna had been hunting for them. This wounded, bleeding animal had been keeping these children alive. Jack's hands began to shake as the full enormity of the situation hit him. These weren't just homeless kids who had wandered into an abandoned barn. They were refugees, survivors, children who had somehow found their way to this forgotten place and been adopted by a creature who understood abandonment and loss better than most humans ever would. His radio crackled again, more insistent now. "Ghost Rider, respond. Company policy requires immediate location update for any unscheduled stop over 15 minutes. Jack looked at Luna, who was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes, and then at the three children who represented someone's lost hopes and broken promises. His daughter Emma's face flashed through his mind. What if it had been her out here, cold and scared and forgotten by the world? He pulled out his cell phone, surprised to find he had 2 bars of service. His finger hovered over the contacts as he tried to decide who to call. 911 would mean police, and police would mean questions these children probably couldn't answer without consequences he couldn't imagine. Child services would mean separation, bureaucracy, and the kind of system that had probably failed them already. But Luna was bleeding, possibly badly, and the temperature was dropping. These children needed help that was beyond his ability to provide alone. Jack scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he'd seen on a faded sign outside this very barn months ago. Dr. Margaret Walsh, large animal veterinarian, available for emergencies. As he dialed, Luna moved closer to the children, her body temperature probably the only thing keeping baby Sarah from hypothermia. The boy, Tommy, reached out tentatively and placed his small hand on Luna's head, and she leaned into his touch with the patience of a saint. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before a sleepy but alert voice answered, "Dr. Walsh, what's the emergency?" Jack looked around the barn at the wounded wolf and the homeless children and the choice that was about to define the rest of his life, and said the words that would set everything in motion. "I need help, and I think they've been waiting for someone to find them." Dr. Margaret Walsh arrived 23 minutes later in a battered Ford pickup that had seen better decades, her veterinary bag clutched in hands that trembled only when she wasn't working. At 52, Maggie had the kind of competence that came from 3 decades of dealing with emergencies in the middle of nowhere, but tonight felt different. The voice on the phone, Jack's voice, had carried something she recognized, the desperate edge of someone who'd stumbled into a situation bigger than they could handle alone. She found Jack standing guard outside the barn doors, his 18-wheeler's hazard lights painting everything in urgent orange. "Inside," he said simply, and something in his tone made her check her medical bag twice before following him through the gap in the weathered wood. Maggie's flashlight beam swept the interior and stopped on a scene that made her breath catch. 3 children huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck, and standing over them, swaying slightly on 3 good legs, was one of the most magnificent animals she'd ever seen. The she-wolf was large for her kind, maybe 80 pounds, with intelligent amber eyes that tracked Maggie's every movement. But it was the wolf's positioning that stopped Maggie cold, protective, purposeful, clearly bonded to these children in a way that defied every textbook she'd ever read. "Jesus," Maggie whispered, then immediately regretted the profanity in front of the kids. The oldest, a girl with enormous dark eyes, whispered something in Spanish to the boy beside her. The baby simply stared with the kind of solemn attention that breaks an adult's heart. Maggie knelt slowly, her joints protesting the cold that had settled into the barn. "I'm a doctor," she said softly, addressing both the children and the wolf. "For animals, but I know about people too. Nobody's in trouble here." The wolf, Luna, took a tentative step forward, and Maggie could see the extent of her injuries. Deep lacerations along the left shoulder, some infected, others healing badly. But more concerning was the way Luna moved, favoring not just the wounded leg but her entire left side, as if compensating for some deeper injury Maggie couldn't yet see. "How long have you been taking care of them?" Jack asked, though he was clearly addressing Luna, not Maggie. It was the girl Maria who answered. "She came maybe 3 weeks ago. When Tommy got sick, she brought medicine." She pointed to a small pile of items near the hay: antiseptic wipes, still in their packages, and what looked like children's Tylenol. "Medicine?" Maggie's trained eye catalogued the items. "Hospital supplies, still sealed." "Where did she get these?" Tommy, the boy with the cautious dark eyes, spoke for the first time. "She goes away sometimes, comes back with food, blankets, medicine. She knows where to find things." Maggie began her examination of Luna, speaking in the calm, steady voice she'd perfected over decades of treating frightened animals. Luna submitted to the examination with the patience of something accustomed to human handling, but her eyes never left the children. As Maggie's hands moved over Luna's body, she found scars, old ones, surgical scars that spoke of professional veterinary care. And around Luna's neck, hidden beneath matted fur, the remnants of what had once been a leather collar. "She's not wild," Maggie said to Jack, her voice carrying the weight of revelation. "Look at these scars. This is professional spay surgery, at least 5 years old. And these marks on her neck. She wore a collar for a long time. This is someone's dog, someone's companion." Jack knelt beside Maggie, his flashlight providing better illumination. "Then where did she come from? Why is she out here with these kids instead of home with her family?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Maria reached into the folds of her thin jacket and pulled out something that made both adults freeze: a set of military dog tags, worn and scratched, but still legible. "She had these," Maria said quietly, "hidden in her collar. Tommy can read the big words." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Hutchinson, Daniel J. And numbers. Lots of numbers." Jack's flashlight beam illuminated the tags, and the name hit him like a physical blow. Daniel J. Hutchinson, Danny, his battle buddy, his friend, the soldier who died in Kandahar 8 years ago when an IED turned their convoy into twisted metal and smoke. Jack's hands began to shake as memories flooded back. Danny's laugh, his stories about his father's ranch in Montana, his K-9 partner who could detect explosives from 50 yards away. "Danny Hutchinson," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is Luna." "This is Danny's Luna." Maggie looked between Jack and the dog tags, understanding beginning to dawn. "You knew him?" "He was my battle buddy. Died in Afghanistan 8 years ago. He always talked about Luna, showed me pictures. Said she was the smartest dog in the unit, saved more lives than any human he knew." Jack's voice cracked slightly. "I was there when the IED went off. I saw the convoy burning. Nobody could have survived that." Luna's ears perked up at the sound of Danny's name, and she moved closer to Jack, her nose working to catch his scent. Something in her posture changed. Recognition, perhaps, or simply the response of an animal who'd been trained to associate certain human scents with safety and home. "If she was military," Maggie said slowly, "and if she's been out here for 8 years, she's been looking for him. She's been searching for Danny this whole time." The implications hung heavy in the cold barn air. Luna hadn't just stumbled across these homeless children by accident. She'd been surviving alone for 8 years, searching for a master who would never come home, and somehow in that long journey of loss and loyalty, she'd found 3 small souls who needed the kind of unconditional love that only comes from someone who understands abandonment. Jack's radio crackled from his distant truck. "Ghost Rider, this is dispatch. GPS shows extended stop. Respond immediately, or we're sending company security to your location." The threat was clear. Jack was minutes away from losing his job, his CDL, his only source of income. But as he looked at Luna, still positioning herself protectively between the children and the adults, he realized some things mattered more than paychecks. "We need to get her to your clinic," Jack said to Maggie. "Those wounds are infected. And the kids need proper shelter, food, medical attention." "Jack," Maggie said carefully, "if I treat her and these children, I'm required by law to report this. Child services, animal control, law enforcement, they'll all get involved. And if we don't treat her, she dies," Jack replied. "And these kids, they've obviously been failed by the system before. Look at how they're protecting each other." Luna chose that moment to lie down heavily beside the children, her breathing labored. Baby Sarah, who couldn't have been more than 18 months old, crawled over and curled up against Luna's warm flank. The sight of the tiny child seeking comfort from the wounded animal broke something open in both adults. "There's something else," Maggie said quietly. "Something I haven't told you. Danny Hutchinson, the name on those tags, that's Earl Hutchinson's boy. Earl owns the ranch about 5 miles from here. He's been my neighbor for 20 years. Jack felt the world shift slightly. "Earl's boy died in Afghanistan. Everyone knows that. Earl got the telegram, had the funeral." "Empty casket funeral," Maggie corrected. "Body never recovered. Earl's never gotten over it, never really accepted it. If Luna's here, if she's been searching all this time—" She trailed off, the implications too enormous to voice. Luna lifted her head at the sound of Earl's name, her ears forward with interest. She struggled to her feet, walked to the barn door, and looked out toward the dark horizon where the Hutchinson ranch lay hidden beyond the rolling hills. "She knows," Jack said with sudden certainty. "She knows where Earl is. She's been close enough to watch, but something's kept her away." As if summoned by their words, a distant sound drifted across the prairie, the growl of an ATV engine growing steadily closer. Someone was coming, and Luna's ears flattened against her head in a way that suggested she knew exactly who it was. The rumble of Earl Hutchinson's ATV cut through the Montana night like a chainsaw through silence. Jack could see the single headlight bouncing across the prairie, still a quarter-mile away but closing fast. Luna's body went rigid, her hackles rising as she positioned herself between the approaching sound and the children. Whatever history existed between Luna and Earl Hutchinson, it wasn't a happy reunion she was anticipating. "That's Earl," Maggie confirmed, her voice tight with concern. "He's probably seen the lights from Jack's truck and come to investigate. Earl doesn't like surprises on his property, and technically this barn sits on land he leases from the state." Jack checked his service weapon, a habit from his military days, then remembered he didn't carry one anymore. Truckers weren't soldiers, and civilian problems required civilian solutions. But as Luna's growl deepened and the children pressed closer together in their makeshift nest, Jack felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. These kids had found safety with Luna, and Luna had found them. Whatever was coming, he wouldn't let it destroy what they'd built together. The ATV's engine cut off maybe 50 yards from the barn, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy with unspoken threats. Footsteps approached through the tall grass, measured, deliberate. The walk of a man who'd spent 71 years learning that life hits hardest when you're not paying attention. Earl Hutchinson appeared in the barn doorway like a figure from an old western, backlit by the distant glow of Jack's hazard lights. He was a big man despite his age, with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of decades working cattle and the kind of steady gaze that missed nothing important. He wore a canvas jacket over worn jeans, and Jack could see the outline of a rifle slung across his back. "Maggie," Earl said, his voice carrying the careful politeness of neighbors who'd known each other for 20 years, but had never been friends. "Didn't expect to find you out here at midnight. Everything all right?" "Evening, Earl," Maggie replied, stepping slightly to block his view of the children. "Just a veterinary emergency. Nothing that concerns you." Earl's eyes moved past Maggie to take in the scene, Jack standing protectively near the hay bales, the scattered supplies, and most importantly, Luna. When his gaze settled on the she-wolf, something changed in his expression. The polite neighborliness drained away, replaced by something harder and more complicated. "That's a wolf," Earl said flatly. "On my leased land, with what looks like a vagrant and 3 kids who shouldn't be out here." His hand moved unconsciously toward the rifle. "Maggie, step away from that animal." "Earl, wait." Jack stepped forward, hands visible and non-threatening. "I'm Jack Romano, driver for Mountain West Transport. I found them here, but they're not causing trouble. The wolf, she's been protecting these children." "Protecting them?" Earl's voice carried 20 years of buried grief. "Wolves don't protect human children, son. They kill them. They kill everything they can't eat, and then they eat what they can." His eyes never left Luna, who stood frozen like a statue carved from shadow and memory. "I learned that lesson the hard way." Maggie moved closer to Earl, her voice gentle but firm. "Earl, this isn't a wild wolf. She's been domesticated, trained. Look at her posture, the way she's responding to us. And she's injured. She needs medical attention." "All wolves need the same kind of medical attention," Earl replied, unsling his rifle with practiced ease. "A bullet behind the ear, quick and clean." Luna's response was immediate and protective. She moved between Earl and the children, her body language shifting from wary to defensive, but she didn't attack, didn't even growl. Instead, she sat in the classic military working dog position, alert, ready, but controlled, waiting for orders that would never come from a handler who would never give them. Tommy, the native boy who'd been silent through most of the evening, suddenly stood up from the hay nest. "You can't hurt her," he said, his young voice carrying unexpected strength. "She saved us. When Maria got sick, Luna brought medicine. When it got cold, she brought blankets. When men came looking for us at the truck stop, she hid us." "Men looking for you?" Jack's protective instincts flared. "What men?" Maria answered in halting English mixed with Spanish. "Men from the place where they kept us. Said we belonged to them, said we had to come back." Luna scared them away. Earl's rifle lowered slightly as the implications hit him. These weren't just homeless children. They were runaways from something worse than the streets. And Luna, this animal he'd been ready to kill, had been their protector against human predators. "Earl," Maggie said carefully, "there's something else. Something you need to see." She gestured to Jack, who reluctantly pulled out the dog tags Maria had given him. "These were in Luna's collar," Jack said, holding them out so Earl could read the name. "Daniel J. Hutchinson. Your son's tags." The rifle slipped from Earl's hands, clattering against the barn floor. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally a grief so raw it was painful to witness. He stared at the tags for a long moment, then looked at Luna with new eyes. "Danny's Luna," he whispered. "His canine partner. But Danny's dead. Has been for 8 years." "I was there," Jack said quietly. "I was Danny's battle buddy in Kandahar. I saw the convoy after the IED hit. Nobody could have survived." Earl walked slowly toward Luna, his movements careful and non-threatening. Luna watched him approach, her amber eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that seemed almost human. When Earl was close enough to touch her, he stopped and extended his hand, palm up, the way Danny had taught him to greet military working dogs during their training. "Luna," Earl said, and his voice broke on the name. "Is it really you, girl?" Luna's response was heartbreaking. She moved closer to Earl, pressing her muzzle into his outstretched hand, and made a sound that was part whine, part sob. It was the sound of recognition, of 8 years of searching finally coming to an end. Earl's weathered hands found the thick fur around her neck, and for a moment the stern rancher disappeared, replaced by a father touching the last living connection to his dead son. "Where has she been all this time?" Earl asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Why didn't she come home?" "Maybe she tried," Maggie suggested gently. "Maybe she's been trying to come home for 8 years but couldn't find her way. Or maybe—" She paused, looking at the 3 children who were watching this reunion with the solemn attention of survivors who understood loss. Maybe she found something else that needed her more. Earl looked at the children, really looked at them for the first time. Maria, maybe 8 years old, with the prematurely serious expression of someone who'd grown up too fast. Tommy, 10 at most, with intelligent eyes that held too much knowledge of disappointment. And baby Sarah, who couldn't be more than 18 months old and shouldn't have been surviving on her own at all. "You've been taking care of them," Earl said to Luna, and it wasn't a question. "Just like you took care of Danny." Luna moved back to the children, lying down so baby Sarah could curl up against her warm flank. The sight of the enormous she-wolf carefully positioning herself to provide maximum comfort for the tiny child was something none of the adults would ever forget. "Earl," Jack said carefully, "we need to make some decisions. Luna needs veterinary care, the children need proper shelter and food, and I've got company dispatch breathing down my neck about my unauthorized stop. And I'm legally required to report this situation," Maggie added. "Child services, law enforcement, they'll all want to get involved." Earl stood up slowly, his knees protesting the cold and the weight of 71 years. He looked at Luna, at the children, at Jack and Maggie, and finally at the rifle lying forgotten on the barn floor. "My son died serving his country," he said finally. His partner spent 8 years searching for him, and when she couldn't find him, she found someone else to protect. Seems to me that's exactly what Danny would have wanted. He walked to the barn entrance and looked out at the prairie that had been his world for 7 decades. "Maggie, how long would it take you to treat Luna's injuries?" "A few hours, maybe more, depending on what I find." "But Earl, the children stay with Luna," Earl said firmly. "At least until we figure out what's best for them, and Luna stays with me." He turned back to face them. "This is still my land, leased or not. Anyone who wants to separate Luna from these kids will have to go through me first." Jack felt a surge of respect for the old rancher. "Earl, that's generous, but the authorities can kiss my ass," Earl replied with the bluntness of a man who'd outlived most of his patience for bureaucracy. "I've been alone on that ranch for 3 years, ever since Margaret died. Maybe it's time I remembered what it feels like to have family around." Luna lifted her head at the mention of family, as if she understood the word and approved of its application to this unlikely group of survivors. Baby Sarah made a small sound in her sleep, and Luna immediately adjusted her position to keep the child warm. "There's something else," Earl continued, his voice softer now. "Something I never told anyone, not even Margaret." He paused, gathering courage to speak a truth he'd been carrying alone. "The day before Danny shipped out, he made me promise something. Said if anything happened to him, I should take care of Luna. Said she was the best partner he'd ever had, human or otherwise." The weight of that 8-year-old promise hung in the cold air between them. Earl had been unable to keep it because he'd thought both Danny and Luna were dead. Now, faced with Luna's survival and her unlikely guardianship of 3 abandoned children, the promise took on new meaning. "I failed them both," Earl said quietly. "Failed Danny by letting him go to war, failed Luna by not looking for her when she needed me. Maybe I can't fix what's broken, but I can damn sure keep what's left from falling apart." Jack's radio crackled from his distant truck one more time. "Ghost Rider, Final warning. Respond or company security is en route. Jack looked at his truck, at his job, at the life he'd been living for the past 8 years since Danny died. Then he looked at Luna, still protecting the children even as her own strength ebbed, and made a decision that would change everything. "Tell them the truck broke down," he said to Earl. "Tell them whatever you want. I'm staying until we get this sorted out." Earl nodded approvingly. "Maggie, can you treat Luna at my ranch?" "Got better facilities there? Generator for power? Clean water?" "Yes," Maggie replied. "But we need to move her soon. She's losing blood, and infection is setting in." "Then we go now," Earl said, taking charge with the authority of a man accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "Jack, can you carry baby Sarah? Tommy and Maria can ride with me on the ATV. Maggie, you think Luna can walk that far?" Luna struggled to her feet as if responding to the question directly. She swayed slightly, but held her ground, her amber eyes fixed on the children with unwavering determination. "She'll make it," Jack said with certainty. "She's been making it for 8 years. She's not going to quit now." The procession from the abandoned barn to Earl Hutchinson's ranch house looked like something from a frontier tale. An old rancher on his ATV with 2 children clinging to him, a trucker carrying a sleeping toddler, a veterinarian with her medical bag, and a wounded she-wolf limping determinedly through the Montana darkness. Luna refused Jack's offer to carry her, maintaining the disciplined pace of a soldier completing her final mission. Earl's ranch house sat in a hollow between 2 hills, a modest 2-story structure built to withstand mountain winters and the loneliness that came with them. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, a recent concession to modern times, and a generator hummed quietly beside the barn, providing the reliable power that Montana's weather often interrupted. As they approached, motion sensor lights flickered on, illuminating a property that spoke of decades of careful maintenance by hands that understood the value of things built to last. "Margaret always kept the guest rooms ready," Earl said as he helped Tommy and Maria down from the ATV. "Said you never knew when someone might need shelter." His voice carried the weight of 3 years of unused hospitality. "Guess she was right, as usual." Maggie immediately began setting up her mobile surgical station in Earl's kitchen, the largest room with the best lighting. She'd performed emergency procedures in stranger places, barn stalls, pickup truck beds, even once on the side of Interstate 90 during a blizzard. Earl's kitchen, with its solid oak table and excellent overhead lighting, was practically a luxury suite by comparison. Luna allowed herself to be guided to the kitchen table, her amber eyes never leaving the children as Jack settled them on the living room couch. Baby Sarah had awakened during the walk but remained quiet, her enormous blue eyes taking in her surroundings with the solemn attention of someone much older. Tommy kept one protective arm around Maria, while Maria whispered to the baby in a mixture of Spanish and English that seemed to calm all 3 of them. "I need to examine her properly," Maggie said, pulling on surgical gloves. "Earl, can you hold her head? Jack, keep the children calm if she starts to struggle." But Luna didn't struggle. As Maggie's experienced hands began probing her injuries, Luna remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled despite what must have been considerable pain. It was the discipline of a working dog, trained to endure discomfort for the greater mission. "Jesus," Maggie whispered as her examination revealed the full extent of Luna's condition. "Earl, look at this." The wounds along Luna's shoulder were worse than they'd appeared in the barn's dim light. Deep lacerations, some infected, others partially healed but still weeping. But more concerning were the older scars, surgical scars that spoke of previous medical procedures and something else that made Maggie's breath catch. "These aren't random injuries," Maggie said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Someone did this to her. Recently. Look at these cuts. They're too precise, too systematic. This is torture, not accident." Earl's weathered hands clenched into fists. "Who would do this to Danny's dog?" "Same kind of people who'd hurt children," Jack replied grimly, glancing toward the living room where Tommy was helping Maria give baby Sarah sips of water from Earl's kitchen cup. Luna found those kids for a reason. Maybe she was running from the same people they were. As Maggie continued her examination, she discovered something that made her pause. Hidden beneath Luna's thick coat, almost invisible against her dark fur, were small, circular scars. Burn marks, she realized with growing horror. Someone had been using Luna for fighting, or worse. "Earl," Maggie said carefully, "I need you to understand something. These injuries, these scars, Luna's been through hell. Whoever had her after she left military service, they weren't kind. She's been abused, systematically and deliberately." The revelation hit Earl like a physical blow. His son's partner, the dog Danny had loved and trusted, had spent years suffering at human hands. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Based on the scarring patterns, maybe 3 or 4 years, Maggie replied. "But she escaped or was discarded, and she's been living rough ever since. These shoulder wounds are recent, maybe 2 weeks old. Something happened that made her run." Luna lifted her head at the sound of distress in Earl's voice, and despite her pain, she nuzzled his hand with the gentle pressure of comfort offered. Even wounded and exhausted, her first instinct was to console the humans around her. "We need to clean these wounds and start antibiotics," Maggie continued, pulling supplies from her bag. "But Earl, there's something else. Something I found that doesn't make sense." She pointed to Luna's abdomen, where careful palpation had revealed something unexpected. "She's been spayed, but the surgery was botched. There's scar tissue and—" Maggie paused, double-checking her findings. "I think she might be pregnant. The spay failed, and she's carrying pups." The kitchen fell silent except for the quiet murmur of children's voices from the living room. Luna, pregnant and wounded, had still chosen to protect 3 human children instead of finding shelter for her own unborn young. "How far along?" Earl asked. "Hard to say without proper equipment, but based on what I can feel, maybe 6 weeks. She's got maybe a month before she delivers." Maggie looked at Earl seriously. "She needs proper veterinary care, real facilities, not emergency medicine on your kitchen table." "Then we get her proper care," Earl said with finality, "whatever it costs." "Earl," Jack interjected gently, "I heard around town that you've been having financial troubles. The drought, medical bills from Margaret's cancer." Earl's jaw tightened. "That's my concern, not yours." "Actually, it might be all our concern," Maggie said, beginning to clean Luna's wounds with antiseptic solution. "If Child Services gets involved, if they find out about the children's situation, Luna's condition, this could get complicated fast." As if summoned by their words, headlights swept across the kitchen window. A vehicle was approaching the ranch, moving fast enough to kick up gravel from Earl's long driveway. Luna's ears pricked forward, and she tried to rise from the table despite Maggie's restraining hands. Her body language shifted immediately from patient to protective, and a low growl rumbled in her chest. "She knows that vehicle," Jack observed, moving instinctively toward the living room where the children were. "Luna, who is it, girl?" The vehicle, a large SUV with tinted windows, pulled up directly in front of the house, its engine idling with the aggressive rumble of something built for intimidation rather than efficiency. Luna's growls intensified, and from the living room came the sound of children's voices raised in fear. "No, no, no," Maria's voice carried clearly. "They found us. Luna, they found us." Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, his young face pale with terror. "It's them," he said simply. "The men who hurt Luna, the men we ran from." Earl reached for the rifle he'd left by the kitchen door, but Jack caught his arm. "Earl, we don't know what we're dealing with here." "Could be law enforcement, could be—" His words were cut off by the sharp crack of car doors slamming, followed by heavy footsteps on the porch. Luna struggled against Maggie's hands with desperate strength, her protective instincts overriding pain and weakness. She needed to get to the children, needed to put herself between them and whatever was coming. A fist pounded on the front door with the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "Open up! We know you've got our property." Property. Earl's voice carried the dangerous quiet that preceded real violence. "Nobody owns children, son." "We're not talking about the kids," a second voice called out. "We're talking about our dog. That animal's worth 50 grand on the circuit and we want her back." The fighting circuit. Luna's scars suddenly made horrible sense. Someone had been using Danny's highly trained K9 partner as a fighting dog, forcing her to battle other animals for the entertainment of people who saw her as nothing more than a commodity. "Like hell," Earl replied, checking his rifle's chamber. Jack positioned himself between the kitchen and the living room, ready to protect the children if the situation escalated. Maggie continued working on Luna's wounds, her hands steady despite the tension. Someone had to keep Luna stable no matter what else happened. "We can do this easy or hard," the first voice called out, "but that dog comes with us either way. She's got a litter coming, and those pups are worth their weight in gold to the right buyers." Luna's pups. They weren't just here for her. They wanted her unborn puppies for their fighting operation. The depth of the cruelty made Jack's military training kick into high gear. These weren't just criminals. They were predators who dealt in suffering. "Maggie," Jack said quietly, "how long before you can safely move Luna?" "She needs at least 2 more hours of treatment, maybe 3. Moving her now could kill her." "And staying here might kill all of us," Earl replied grimly. He looked at his rifle, then at the kitchen where Luna lay vulnerable on his table, then toward the living room where 3 children huddled in terror. 47 years I've been making hard choices on this ranch. Guess I got 1 more to make." Luna lifted her head and looked directly at Earl, her amber eyes holding the same steady courage that had once made Danny Hutchinson proud to serve beside her. Despite her injuries, despite her exhaustion, despite the terror of the men outside, she was ready to fight one more time. "Not this time, girl," Earl said gently, stroking Luna's head. "This time let the humans do the fighting." He walked to the front door, rifle in hand, and called out to the men waiting in the darkness. "This is Earl Hutchinson, and you're on my property without permission. You've got 30 seconds to get back in your vehicle and leave, or we're going to have a problem." "Old man, you don't understand what you're dealing with," came the reply. "That dog killed 2 of our best fighters before she ran. She's dangerous, unstable. We're doing you a favor taking her off your hands." Earl opened the door just wide enough to show the barrel of his rifle. "Son, I'm 71 years old. I buried my wife 3 years ago and my boy 8 years before that, and I haven't had a good night's sleep since Reagan was president. If you think some punk with a fancy truck is going to intimidate me on my own land, you're about to learn why Montana boys don't back down from a fight." The standoff lasted exactly 43 seconds before everything went wrong. Earl's rifle was steady, his voice calm, but the men outside weren't the type to be intimidated by an elderly rancher with outdated equipment. The lead man, tall, wearing expensive boots and the kind of confidence that came from never losing a fight, stepped into the porch light with his hands visible but his posture radiating threat. "Mr. Hutchinson," he said with practiced politeness that fooled nobody, "I'm Marcus Webb. That animal in your house belongs to my organization. We've got papers, ownership documents, the whole 9 yards. She's stolen property, and harboring stolen property is a felony in Montana." Behind him, 2 other men flanked the porch, and Jack could see at least 1 more figure moving around the side of the house. These weren't desperate criminals. They were professionals, organized, with resources and experience in retrieving what they considered their assets. "Papers don't mean shit when the property can think and feel," Earl replied. But Jack could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Legal paperwork was something Earl understood, and if these men really had legitimate ownership documents— "Earl!" Jack called from inside the house. "Don't let them in! Something's not right here!" Webb pulled out a manila folder and held it where Earl could see official-looking documents. Purchased from a military surplus auction 3 years ago. Bill of sale, transfer of ownership, even her medical records. Luna, that's her name, isn't it, has been our property for 36 months. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Luna hadn't escaped from abusive owners. She'd been legally sold to them by the military, discarded like surplus equipment when her service ended. Danny's partner, the dog who'd saved countless lives in Afghanistan, had been auctioned off to the highest bidder like a piece of used machinery. From the kitchen came the sound of Luna struggling against Maggie's restraining hands, her whines growing more desperate as she sensed the threat outside. The children in the living room had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that comes from learning to hide when predators are near. "Even if that's true," Earl said, though his rifle wavered slightly. "She's injured. She needs medical attention." "Which is why we're here," Webb replied smoothly. "We've got a veterinarian waiting in our vehicle, proper equipment, everything she needs. We take care of our investments, Mr. Hutchinson." But it was what Webb didn't say that made Jack's skin crawl. No mention of the children, no questions about why Luna had been protecting them, no concern for her pregnancy or her obvious trauma. These men saw Luna as a commodity to be recovered, nothing more. "She's pregnant," Earl said, playing for time. "Moving her now could kill the pups." Webb's smile was the coldest thing Jack had ever seen. "Those pups are worth $40,000 each to the right buyers. Trust me, we're very motivated to keep them healthy." $40,000 per puppy. Luna's unborn children were already sold, already condemned to lives of violence and abuse. The magnitude of the evil they were facing began to dawn on Jack, and his hand instinctively moved toward the phone in his pocket. "I'm calling the sheriff," Jack announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Go ahead," Webb replied. "Sheriff Morrison knows us. We've got all the proper permits for animal recovery. He'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you. That dog comes with us." From the kitchen, Maggie's voice carried a note of panic. "She's crashing! Her blood pressure's dropping fast!" Luna's distress at hearing Webb's voice was causing her body to shut down. Whatever these men had done to her, the psychological trauma was as severe as her physical injuries. Jack made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Webb," he called out, "you want to see your property? Come on in." "Jack, no!" Earl protested, but Jack was already opening the door wider. Webb stepped into Earl's living room with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. He was younger than Jack had expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of expensive casual wear that suggested serious money behind his operation. His eyes swept the room, taking in the 3 children huddled on the couch, and his expression didn't change at all. They were just obstacles, complications in his property recovery. "Where is she?" Webb asked. Jack gestured toward the kitchen, and Webb walked past him like he owned the place. When he appeared in the kitchen doorway, Luna's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. The proud, military working dog who'd faced down insurgents and bombs began to shake uncontrollably, her amber eyes wide with terror. "Hello, Luna," Webb said softly. "Miss me?" Luna tried to scramble off the table despite Maggie's attempts to hold her still. Her wounds reopened, sending fresh blood across Earl's kitchen floor, but her panic overrode everything else. She was trying to run, trying to fight, trying to do anything except submit to the man who'd tortured her. "Stop it!" Maggie shouted. "You're killing her!" But Webb was already pulling out a remote control device, something small and black that he pointed at Luna like a weapon. "Luna, down!" he commanded, and pressed a button. Luna collapsed on the kitchen table, her body convulsing as electrical current coursed through a shock collar hidden beneath her matted fur. Jack lunged forward, but one of Webb's men appeared behind him, pressing something hard against his ribs that felt very much like a gun barrel. "Easy, soldier boy," the man murmured. "Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be." Earl started to raise his rifle, but Webb's second associate had already moved behind him, close enough to render the weapon useless. These men were professionals, and they'd walked into Earl's house like they owned it because, legally, they probably did. "The collar's a training tool," Webb explained casually as Luna's convulsions subsided into helpless whimpering, "very effective for managing aggressive animals. She's learned not to disobey when she hears my voice." The casual cruelty of it made Jack's vision go red around the edges. This wasn't just animal abuse. It was psychological torture, systematic and deliberate. Luna hadn't just been used as a fighting dog. She'd been broken, trained to submit through pain and terror. "You son of a bitch," Earl whispered. "I'm a businessman," Webb corrected, "and my business is taking back what belongs to me." What happened next would be debated in Montana newspapers for months, but everyone agreed on one thing. It started with 11-year-old Emma Hutchinson walking through Earl's front door at exactly 2:47 a.m. Emma had snuck out of her parents' house in Missoula 3 hours earlier, stealing her mother's car keys and driving the 68 miles to her grandfather's ranch on nothing but determination and the kind of reckless courage that only comes from being too young to understand consequences. She'd heard the phone call earlier that evening, her mother talking to someone about Uncle Danny, about a dog, about Grandpa Earl being in some kind of trouble. She walked into her grandfather's living room wearing pink pajamas and cowboy boots, took one look at the 3 terrified children huddled on the couch, the men with guns standing over her grandfather and Jack, and said the words that changed everything. "Grandpa Earl, who are these bad men?" The simplicity of it. A child's absolute moral clarity in a situation where adults had gotten lost in legalities and complications. Cut through the tension like a blade. Webb and his men suddenly found themselves faced with something they hadn't prepared for, an innocent witness who saw them exactly as they were. "Emma," Earl said carefully, his voice steady despite the gun still pressed against his ribs, "you shouldn't be here, sweetheart. It's not safe." But Emma wasn't looking at the guns or the threatening men. She was looking at Luna, collapsed on the kitchen table with blood pooling beneath her, and her young face crumpled with fury. "They hurt Uncle Danny's dog," she said, and it wasn't a question. Webb tried to maintain control of the situation. "Little girl, this is adult business. Your grandfather will explain." "Uncle Danny told me about Luna," Emma interrupted, walking past Webb like he didn't exist. "Before he went to war, he showed me pictures. Said she was the smartest, bravest dog in the whole army. Said she saved lots of people." The room went dead silent. Earl stared at his granddaughter as if she'd spoken in tongues. "Emma, honey, Uncle Danny died in Afghanistan 8 years ago." Emma looked at him with the patient expression children reserve for adults who've missed something obvious. "No, Grandpa. Uncle Danny's in Seattle, at the hospital for soldiers who got hurt in their heads. He calls me sometimes, but Mom and Dad don't know because it makes them sad." The revelation hit Earl like a physical blow. His son, his boy who'd been dead for 8 years, was alive. Had been alive all this time in a VA psychiatric facility, and Emma had been the only one who knew. Webb tried to regain control. "That's a very nice story, little girl, but he's not dead," Emma continued, pulling out a small flip phone that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Want me to call him? He gave me this special phone so we could talk without making the grown-ups cry." Jack's mind raced through the implications. If Danny was alive, if he was in a VA facility in Seattle, then Luna's 8-year search made perfect sense. She hadn't been looking for a dead master. She'd been trying to reach a living one who couldn't come home. "Emma," Jack said carefully, "when did Uncle Danny last call you?" 3 days ago, Emma replied matter-of-factly. He was worried about Luna. Said he had bad dreams about her being hurt, and his doctor said the dreams meant something real was happening. Webb's confident expression was beginning to crack. This wasn't part of his plan. Legal ownership documents were one thing, but if there was a living veteran with a legitimate claim to Luna, the situation became exponentially more complicated. Even if that's true, Webb said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty, our paperwork is solid. Military surplus auction, legal transfer of ownership. From who? Earl demanded, his grandfather's protective instincts overriding everything else. Who authorized the sale of my son's partner while he was still alive? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. If Danny had been alive in a VA facility, classified as a John Doe due to his injuries, then someone had sold Luna illegally. The military surplus auction Webb kept mentioning would have been fraudulent from the start. Emma walked over to Luna, who lifted her head weakly at the child's approach. Despite her pain and terror, Luna's tail managed a faint wag. Emma placed her small hand gently on Luna's head and whispered, "Uncle Danny's coming. He's been looking for you, too." Then Emma did something that caught everyone off guard. She flipped open the ancient phone and pressed a speed dial number. "Uncle Danny, it's Emma. I'm at Grandpa's house and Luna's here and there's bad men trying to take her away." The phone speaker was loud enough for everyone in the kitchen to hear the voice that answered, "Emma? Baby girl, what do you mean Luna's there? Where's there?" Earl's legs nearly gave out. The voice was older, rougher, marked by years of trauma and medication, but it was unmistakably his son's voice. Danny, his boy, alive. "Grandpa Earl's ranch," Emma explained with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. "Luna found some kids who needed help and she's hurt real bad and these men say they own her." "Put the phone on speaker." Danny's voice carried a new urgency. "Let me talk to whoever's in charge." Webb tried to object, but Jack had already taken the phone from Emma and switched it to speaker mode. "Danny, this is Jack Romano. We served together in Kandahar. I was there when your convoy got hit." The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Danny spoke again. "Jack. Jesus Christ, Jack Romano. I remember you. You pulled me out of the burning Humvee. I thought you were dead. I thought everyone was dead." Webb was backing toward the door, his confident demeanor completely shattered. Whatever legal claim he thought he had evaporated the moment a living veteran with a legitimate connection to Luna entered the conversation. "Sir," Webb tried one last time, "we have substantial investment in this animal." "You have shit," Danny's voice cut through the speaker with military authority. "Luna is a retired military working dog and I'm her handler. Any sale that occurred without my consent is fraudulent." But Webb wasn't done. In desperation, he pulled out the remote control again, pointing it at Luna. "Maybe the paperwork's questionable, but possession is 9/10 of the law. She comes with us, or I activate the collar again." That's when Earl Hutchinson, 71 years old and tired of being pushed around in his own house, made a decision that would be talked about in Montana bars for the next decade. He looked at his granddaughter, standing protectively beside Luna with the fearless determination of youth, listened to his son's voice coming through a phone he'd thought he'd never hear again, and decided that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the consequences. "Son," Earl said to Webb with the calm that comes before violence, "you just threatened my family." What happened next occurred so fast that even Jack, with his military training, had trouble following it. Earl, despite his age, still had the reflexes of a man who'd spent 50 years working cattle and fixing equipment. He drove his elbow backward into the ribs of the man holding a gun on him, grabbed the rifle that clattered to the floor, and had it pointed at Webb's chest before anyone else could react. "Drop the remote," Earl commanded. Webb hesitated for a fraction of a second, which was long enough for Luna to gather her remaining strength and lunge from the table. Despite her injuries, despite the shock collar, despite 8 years of abuse and terror, Danny's partner still had enough fight left to to protect her new pack. She knocked Webb to the ground, her jaws clamping around his wrist, with the kind of pressure that makes bones creak. The remote control skittered across the kitchen floor, where Emma calmly picked it up and dropped it into Earl's coffee cup, shorting out the electronics in a satisfying shower of sparks. "Luna, off!" Danny's voice commanded through the phone speaker, and Luna immediately released Webb's arm, though she remained standing over him with the calm authority of a sentry who'd caught an intruder. Webb's men looked at their boss writhing on the floor beneath a blood-covered wolf, at the elderly rancher holding a rifle like he knew how to use it, at the trucker who'd moved to block their exit, and at the 11-year-old girl who'd just destroyed their primary means of control. Without a word, they backed toward the door. "We'll be back," Webb gasped, clutching his bleeding wrist. "With lawyers, with court orders." "You do that," Earl replied. "But next time, you might want to make sure you're not committing felony fraud before you threaten my family." Danny's voice came through the phone again. "Dad, is that really you?" Earl's hand shook as he picked up the phone. "Yeah, son. It's me. And I'm sorry." "I'm so goddamn sorry we didn't find you sooner. Dad, I remember now. Hearing Luna, hearing your voice, it's all coming back. The ranch, Mom's cooking, the way you taught me to fix fence. I remember everything." Emma looked up at her grandfather with the wisdom that sometimes comes to children who've seen too much. "See, Grandpa? I told you Uncle Danny wasn't really dead. Sometimes people just get lost, but that doesn't mean they can't find their way home." Luna, despite her injuries and exhaustion, managed to lift her head toward the phone speaker, and she made a sound that was part whine, part howl, the sound of a soldier reporting for duty after 8 years of being AWOL. "I hear you, girl," Danny's voice said softly. "I hear you, and I'm coming home." Danny Hutchinson arrived at his father's ranch 18 hours later in a VA medical transport van, accompanied by 2 doctors, a social worker, and enough paperwork to choke a horse. Jack watched from the kitchen window as the van pulled up the gravel drive, its government plates catching the morning sun like a promise finally kept. Luna had spent the night on a makeshift bed beside the kitchen table, too weak to move, but alert enough to lift her head every time a car passed on the distant highway. Maggie had worked through the dawn hours, cleaning wounds, administering antibiotics, and monitoring the vital signs of both Luna and her unborn pups. The 3 children, Maria, Tommy, and baby Sarah, had slept in Earl's guest rooms, the first real beds they'd known in months. Earl stood on his front porch with the rigid posture of a man preparing for the most important moment of his life. 8 years of grief had carved lines into his weathered face, but now those lines seemed deeper, more complicated. Hope was harder to bear than despair, Jack realized, watching his friend struggle with the possibility that his world might be about to change again. The van's doors opened, and Danny Hutchinson stepped onto Montana soil for the first time in 8 years. He was thinner than Jack remembered, gray-haired at 34, with the careful movements of someone who'd learned not to trust his own body's responses. The confident young soldier who'd shipped out to Afghanistan was gone, replaced by a man who carried invisible wounds that might never fully heal. But his eyes, those were still Danny's eyes, still sharp with intelligence and the kind of stubborn courage that had made him volunteer for the most dangerous missions. Father and son stood 20 feet apart, staring at each other across a gulf of time and trauma that seemed impossible to bridge. Earl's hands shook with the effort of not running forward, not crushing his boy in the kind of embrace that might shatter them both. Danny's face cycled through expressions: recognition, uncertainty, hope, fear, as memories surfaced and submerged like debris from a shipwreck. It was Luna who broke the stalemate. Despite her injuries, despite Maggie's protests, Luna struggled to her feet and limped to the screen door. Her amber eyes fixed on Danny through the mesh, and she made a sound that was part whine, part song, the sound of a soldier greeting her commanding officer after a very long deployment. Danny's face crumpled. "Luna," he whispered, and 8 years of carefully constructed psychological barriers came tumbling down. "My girl, my good girl." He walked to the porch, ignoring the VA doctors who tried to caution him about moving too fast, and knelt beside the screen door. Luna pressed her muzzle against the mesh, her tail wagging despite the pain it must have caused her wounded body. "I looked for you," Danny said, his voice breaking. "After I woke up in the hospital, after I remembered your name, I looked everywhere. They told me you were dead." Earl finally found his voice. "She looked for you too, son. For 8 years she never stopped looking." Danny stood slowly, his hand still pressed against the screen door where Luna waited, and looked at his father properly for the first time. "Dad," he said simply. "Danny." The embrace that followed was awkward, tentative, the embrace of two men who loved each other but had forgotten how to show it. Earl's shoulders shook with 8 years of unshed tears, while Danny held on like a man afraid he might disappear again if he let go. Jack found himself wiping his own eyes as he watched the reunion. Behind him, the 3 children had gathered in the kitchen doorway, watching with the solemn attention of young people who understood the value of families being put back together. "The kids," Danny said suddenly, pulling away from his father. "Emma told me about the kids Luna was protecting. Maria, Tommy, and baby Sarah," Jack explained. "Luna found them, kept them safe. We're still figuring out the best situation for them." Danny looked at the 3 children, then at Luna, then at his father. "She was doing what she was trained to do," he said. "Protect and serve. Even when nobody was giving her orders, even when she was hurt and scared, she kept doing her job." Dr. Patricia Henley, the lead VA psychiatrist who'd accompanied Danny, stepped forward. "Mr. Hutchinson, we need to discuss Daniel's treatment plan, his living situation. This reunion is wonderful, but we can't ignore his ongoing therapeutic needs." "He's staying here," Earl said with finality. "This is his home." "Earl," Dr. Henley said gently, "Daniel has been making remarkable progress in our residential facility. The structure, the medical supervision—" "I want to stay," Danny interrupted. "If Dad will have me, if Luna can recover here, I want to be home." Earl nodded, not trusting his voice. But the reunion was interrupted by the sound of more vehicles approaching. Sheriff Morrison's cruiser led a convoy that included a child services van, an animal control truck, and 2 news vehicles that had somehow gotten word of the story. "Shit," Jack muttered. The cavalry's arrived. Sheriff Morrison approached the porch with the weary expression of a man who'd been awakened at dawn to deal with a situation that was already more complicated than his morning coffee could handle. "Earl," he said with a nod, "heard you had some excitement last night." "Nothing I couldn't handle, Bill." "So I gathered. Found Marcus Webb at the hospital with bite marks and a lawyer. He's making noise about pressing charges, filing injunctions, the whole 9 yards. Danny stepped forward, and Jack saw a flash of the soldier he'd once been. "Sheriff, I'm Staff Sergeant Daniel Hutchinson, retired. Luna is my K-9 partner, retired military working dog. Any claims of ownership by Marcus Webb or his organization are fraudulent." Sheriff Morrison looked Danny up and down, taking in the VA medical bracelet, the careful posture of someone managing invisible injuries, the unmistakable bearing of military service. "Son, you've been declared dead. Legally speaking, you don't exist." "Actually," Dr. Henley interjected, pulling out a thick folder, "we've been working on that. Daniel's legal status is being restored. It's complicated, but the VA has precedent for cases like this." Emma, who'd been remarkably quiet during the reunion, suddenly piped up from behind Jack. "What about the kids? What's going to happen to Maria and Tommy and Sarah?" The child services worker, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, stepped forward. That's what we're here to determine. These children need proper placement, medical care, education. They need to stay together, Tommy said, speaking for the first time since the adults had arrived. Luna kept us together. We're family now. Honey, the worker said kindly, I understand you've bonded, but they can stay here, Earl said suddenly. Everyone turned to stare at him. I've got room, resources. Luna clearly chose to protect them, and Danny's home now. Seems to me Luna knew what she was doing. Sheriff Morrison rubbed his forehead. Earl, you can't just adopt 3 kids because your dog likes them. Watch me, Earl replied with the stubborn certainty of a man who'd spent 71 years making his own decisions. The social worker began explaining procedures, legal requirements, background checks, and home evaluations. The animal control officer wanted to examine Luna, verify her vaccinations, assess her temperament. The news reporters wanted statements from everyone, but Jack was watching Luna, who had managed to position herself where she could see Danny, Earl, and the 3 children simultaneously. Despite her injuries, despite her exhaustion, she was still on duty, still protecting her pack. You know what I think? Emma said suddenly, cutting through all the adult voices. I think Luna's been waiting 8 years to bring Uncle Danny home, and now she did it. And I think she brought the kids because she knew we needed a bigger family. The simple wisdom of it silenced everyone. Luna, the military working dog who'd spent 8 years searching for her missing handler, had found him by becoming the protector of 3 lost children. In saving them, she'd saved herself. In bringing them home, she'd brought Danny home too. Danny knelt beside Luna again, his hand gentle on her head. Good girl, he whispered. Mission accomplished. Luna's tail wagged once, weakly, and she finally allowed herself to rest. For the first time in 8 years, she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by family, guarding the pack she'd chosen, waiting for the next order from the handler who'd never really left her behind. Outside, the Montana morning stretched golden across the prairie, full of the promise that broken things could be mended, lost things could be found, and sometimes the longest journeys end exactly where they began. Sometimes the greatest journeys end exactly where they began, but we're not the same people who started walking. Luna's 8-year search for Danny wasn't just about finding her handler. It was about proving that love doesn't have an expiration date, that loyalty doesn't fade with time, and that family isn't always the one you're born into. For those of us who've lived long enough to know real loss, Luna's story reminds us that hope isn't naive, it's necessary. She protected 3 forgotten children because she understood what it felt like to be abandoned. And in doing so, she brought a father and son back together after 8 years of believing love had died on a foreign battlefield. Earl thought his family story was over at 71, but Luna showed him it was just beginning a new chapter. How many of us have written ourselves off too early, convinced our best days are behind us? How many Danny Hutchinsons are still out there waiting for someone to believe they're worth finding? Sometimes the family we need finds us in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes an old dog really can teach us new tricks about what it means to never give up on the people we love. Discussion questions. Have you ever experienced an unexpected reunion or second chance that changed your perspective on hope and family? What Luna in your life has shown you that loyalty and love can survive even the longest separations? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories of unexpected blessings and second chances.